Welcome to the Trip Tales podcast with me, Kelsey Graves. Let's jump into a new episode exploring a vacation destination that you'll want all the details about. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 31 of Trip Tales, where we are going to be diving into an incredible family trip to Portugal with my guest, Jenny. But first, last week, I begged y'all to leave some reviews wherever you are listening to this podcast, and you did, which is amazing because as you've probably heard many podcasters say, 5-star reviews are the secret sauce to getting a podcast to come up higher when people are searching in those podcast apps. So last week, I jumped from 13 reviews in the Apple Podcast app up to 17. Hooray! Slowly but surely, we are getting there. I really loved this new review from Linda, who wrote, "Oh my goodness, just listen. For a wannabe traveler, this podcast will have you packing your bags. So much detailed information for those of us who have not yet explored all the places we want to go. Listening paints a picture of the destination. I will keep listening and planning. So thankful to find this podcast." Thank you for taking the time to write that lovely review, Linda. And if you haven't yet left a review, take a quick pause right now so you don't forget. Type in a quick 5-star review and we'll see how high we can get this next week. Okay, let's head to Portugal with my guest, Jenny. Welcome, Jenny. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for letting me relive these trip memories today.
Yes, it's so fun to go back down the rabbit hole of the photos and the memories. I start with a rapid fire get to know you, so tell everyone where you live and about your family.
All right. Well, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived here almost 20 years, which I think makes me almost native the way things are going in Nashville with so many people moving in. But we moved to Franklin about 5 years ago, and my husband is CT, and then I have a 10-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter.
Amazing. So Jenny and I live in the same town of Franklin, Tennessee. So we know each other outside of this podcast. And one of my friends was like, you should totally reach out to Jenny about this Portugal trip she took. And so I texted her and was like, hey, do you want to come on the pod? And she agreed. So I'm so thankful for that. This past summer, July 2024, your family took a trip to Portugal, specifically to a group of islands called we're going to say it again, Azores. Azores. We're not exactly sure, but we're going to say Azores. So the Azores are actually off the coast of Portugal, and it's made up of 9 small islands. So picture flying over the Atlantic Ocean from like New York City to Spain or Portugal. This group of 9 islands is about 3/4 of the way on your way to Europe. You'd like fly right over them. They're clustered together in the middle of the ocean, and it almost reminds me of Hawaii, except they're smack dab in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So, Jenny, this trip and destination, the Azores, is brand new to me. I had to pull up Google Maps last night to get my bearings on this cluster of islands. So, tell everyone how you learned about the Azores and how this trip came to be.
So we had also not heard of them, knew nothing about them. We wanted to plan a big summer trip. We had 2 milestone birthdays in our family. 3 if you ask my daughter. She turned 5, and so she felt like that needed to be included as well.
Absolutely.
So we wanted to do a big adventure trip, also because we felt like we're finally getting to the age, which I think you will relate to, where our kids can do things. We don't have to take a stroller or a car seat. And so we felt like we could actually do something more exciting. And we wanted to do something international. This is our first time for our kids to go out of the country. So we wanted to dip our toes in. We wanted adventure, beauty. And then because we live in Tennessee and we like to go on vacation in July, our goal is always to go somewhere more temperate and get out of the hot, humid, oppressive feeling that Tennessee has in July. So we were looking at various places, and we were thinking about Costa Rica, some other areas. And then we were having lunch with some newer friends, and they were telling us about this trip they had taken to the Azores. And as they were talking, CT and I were kind of looking at each other across the table like, well, this sounds very interesting. This seems to check a lot of our trip wishes on this list that we have. And so we started looking into it more and realized it was exactly where we wanted to go. It was the mix of adventure, beauty, international, food. We're foodies, so we always want to go somewhere with interesting food to have. And it just checked all the boxes.
Amazing. And so it's 9 islands, but you guys spent most of your time or all of your time on one, Sao Miguel. Is that
Yes,
right?
that's correct. We only went to the main island, San Miguel. We were there 10 days, except we ended up being there 12 because we were there during that global IT airplane issue. And so we got 2 extra days of vacation. Thank you, United Airlines. And I would say we were about done with what you could do on that island, but we could have stayed longer and just enjoyed more, you know. So there was plenty to do for that long period of time. I do now I've talked to some people. It's funny, as I've talked to people, they've said, "Oh, my friend is going there," or I've heard a friend of a friend is going there. And I ended up connecting with a couple people for recommendations before I left that I didn't know. It was like the Azores travel fan club, right? You
Yeah.
just start making friends. But some of them had gone to São Miguel for several days and then gone to a different island or gone to mainland Portugal, which you could certainly do. But especially having kids our age, we wanted to spend most of our time soaking it up and not actively traveling.
Yeah, for sure. So San Miguel is the main island, so that's good to know. And it looks like you flew directly there, right?
We flew from Nashville to Newark, and then there was an overnight flight that went straight from Newark to Ponta Delgada. That's the main city in San Miguel. It was a 5 or 6 hour flight. It was so easy. And as you said, it is sort of like Hawaii in many ways. And we later were talking about how much easier it is to get there than Hawaii. So it's
Yeah,
funny that us people on the eastern side of the United States don't know more about it because you get very similar feels, though far more European, which we can come back to as we talk. But
sounds awesome.
it's pretty easy to get to.
How did everyone do on the long flight?
Fine. We had talked with our kids about you need to try to go to sleep. We're not watching the iPad for 6 hours and then you get there and haven't slept. Honestly, it wasn't really long enough for anybody to get enough sleep, but it overall went fine. We had a really long layover in Newark, which was the hardest part. But just because of the way everything lined up, that's what we had to do. I think there are also direct flights out of Boston, but I suspect not many. So you sort of have to take what you can get with that.
Yeah. I have heard people saying like from New York to some of the European cities or even like this, like it's really almost not long enough because the lights are on at the beginning. Sometimes they'll serve you a meal, then the lights finally go off. And then like an hour before you land, they kind of start prepping you to land. And so you're like, wait, I didn't get
Yeah,
to
they're like,
sleep at
"Good
all.
morning."
Yes.
And it's been 2 hours.
Right,
Yes.
right. Well, that's great to know that you can fly directly into this island. So you get there, and was the airport fine? I know sometimes the island airports can be a little wild.
It was completely fine. It was crazy in that we know we're descending and we're looking out of the airplane and all you see is ocean. So you do have to trust that there will be land coming up. And as we were pulling in, all of a sudden there was land and these steep cliffs just going straight down into the ocean. And it was such a cool way to approach it and see it. The airport itself was fine. It was interesting in that all these big airplanes that had traveled overnight just parked outside and we had to get down and then walk like a little trail that they had to go into the airport because the airport I think is not big enough to
Right,
have
for
such
sure.
big airplanes come into it.
Your
And
kids
again, the
probably thought that was
airport,
cool, though.
oh yes. Yes, my kids are at an age where the travel part is super interesting and seeing the airplane, they got to see it more up close getting off of it like that. So that was fine. And we rented a car, which ended up being easy. I will say we were concerned for a while because neither of us drive stick, and that is most common there. So we did end up finding, I think we had to pay more. I don't really know. I let my husband deal with that because it stressed me out. But we did find an automatic. So we are still married. We survived that. But we rented a car, which I think is probably important.
Hey, Trip Tales listeners. So, you all know how much I absolutely love creating content for Trip Tales, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to combine their love for travel and chatting with amazing people? But let's be real. As much fun as this is, travel content creation can be a bit pricey. From flights to hours of editing, while I juggle the chaos of being a mom of 3, it's a wild but awesome ride. But guess what? There's this super cool website called buymeacoffee.com that was made specifically for creators like me and coffee lovers like, well, all of us. You can now support Trip Tales by literally buying me a coffee. Trust me, this busy mom could use a little caffeine boost to keep bringing you all the travel tales and tips you love. Plus, here's the fun part. If you do buy me a coffee, I'll give you a special shout out by name in the next episode. So, if you enjoy the podcast and want to support the show and my grocery bill, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Kelsey Graves or click the link in the show notes. A huge thank you in advance for considering it and for keeping my coffee cup full and my mic on. All right, now let's dive back into today's episode. Yes. Okay. Good to know. And also good to know that most of them are stick.
Yes.
Was it just like a random rental car, like a company that we're used to, or did they have their own specific companies?
We used SIXT, which when we returned into the Nashville airport, I said, oh, look, there's a SIXT sign. I had no idea. I'm
Like
used to
the number
Kurt Davis.
six?
No, I want to say it was like SIXT. It's a European rental company, I
Okay.
think, but they do have some in America. But we did rent a European car. I never knew what kind it was while we were there, but it was fine and it was not a big deal.
Sweet. Okay, you hopped around to a few different areas on the island that we will talk about and get into more detail. But how did you come up with your plan and itinerary here? Because you guys did a ton, and I have to imagine a lot of this was like pre-thought out.
It was. I love to trip plan, so I had really enjoyed reading about it and Googling things to know what we might want to do. Also, the friends that I said initially had talked about this. The husband loves to do trip adventures, and he sent us this Google Doc, and it was really funny because we just said, hey, we'd love some recommendations, thinking, where did you stay? What are the main places you should hit up? And he ended up sending us, I would say, a 40-page Google Doc that had different approaches, like a counterclockwise island approach or a clockwise island approach. It was really in
That
detail.
he had created?
He had created this, yes. We read it, we just started laughing. We were like, look at this level of detail. Who needs a travel agent, right?
Yeah.
But that helped a lot. And then we got the Moon series, had a book about the Azores, which we got, and I would say was decently helpful. It wasn't as in detail as my friend's 40-page Google Doc, but it was still helpful. But combined all those things, I sort of had a plan going in of what I thought we might do. And then, of course, we adjusted it as we went.
Have you used ChatGPT yet to plan a trip?
No. I have heard our mutual friend I know did. And I was like, what do you even mean? That feels very alien to me.
Okay. I have to tell you what I just did because it's like free. You just like chatgpt.com or whatever. You sign up, you give your email address. And I've done it a few times now, but I'm planning a New York City trip. And I wouldn't say just plan me a trip. That feels like it needs some details.
Mm-hmm.
But I listed my kids' ages. I knew where we were staying and what time, like which hotel we were staying at. So the location and when we were flying in and leaving. And then based on my own research, like you, I knew the top 6 things we wanted to do, Statue of Liberty. By the way, my kids do not know we're going on this trip. So I should probably not be broadcasting this to the podcast audience, but I don't think they listen. So,
your kids aren't downloading this immediately?
Yeah, hopefully not. Museum of Ice Cream, Slime Museum, the Harry Potter show on Broadway. There's the Summit one where you go up really high and whatever. So I list out my 6 things I definitely want to do. I also want to have a super fun birthday lunch for my teen daughter, somewhere super girly and cool. So kind of like that level of almost just like junky detail, though I'm just like typing it all in like this. Make me an itinerary. It made the itinerary based on locations of things. That was the most helpful part because I didn't have to like pull up a map and be like, okay, where's this? And then it was like, this is your Lower Manhattan Battery Park Statue of Liberty Day. This is your Midtown whatever day. This is your Times Square and Broadway Day. And it was just like, and seriously, I'm like, I changed a couple things, but it did it for me in 10 seconds. So that's a really fun tool. It's not going to do it perfectly, but it's going to help you kind of like your friend did. But instead of typing up 40 pages, it's going to do it in 10 seconds and tell you, the best plan of attack.
That makes me want to go back and type that in about the trip we did and see what ChatGPT would tell me. Did I do it right? Should I have done it differently? I would say for me, I am an organizer. I love to figure out logistics. Like, for example, I love to meal plan. I love figuring out how all things will work. This also made Disney World a nightmare for me because I feel like I spent the entire trip on my phone trying to figure out our genie passes or whatever they're called.
I
And I
feel
didn't
you
just
there. And you're like,
absorb the moment.
I don't want to miss one thing. I'm the same way. Like
Yes,
I'd rather know everything. Whereas our good mutual friend is like, no, you just have to show up and let the trip happen. I'm like, but what if you miss the best restaurant in town? You were right
absolutely.
there.
Absolutely.
So
And
I'm like you.
I would love to channel some of her impulsivity and be in the momentness, but that's not who I am. And so for me, I love figuring it out, even while we're there, more so than beforehand. But when I have that skeleton of what I think I will do, I love to be there and then look at, okay, if we go to this place from here, we can hit this side up in between. That part I find fun. Again, not somewhere like Disney World where there's too much of it, but
Yeah.
on this trip, it was part of the fun for me.
Okay. So before we get into the specific towns and areas, paint the picture of Sao Miguel Island for us. Like, what are you seeing when you arrive and when you're driving around?
So imagine Hawaii in Europe with some Yellowstone. It's a volcanic island. All the islands are. And so you have jagged cliffs. You have a lot of volcanic rocks, that black, jagged looking rocks around the coastlines. Most beaches are not sandy. We're not talking 30A type beaches here. There are more like Hawaii beaches that have different feels and different characters each place you go, which was really interesting for my kids who had never seen anything like that. And some of them are black sand from that volcanic rock, which was also really
I'm not
interesting.
sure if I've been on a black sand beach. So it's legit black sand.
Black. Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yes. We went to one black sand beach that had just a jagged cliff line behind it. And there was all this driftwood, and they had made driftwood teepees, like just around the beach. And while we were there were some other Portuguese families, maybe two, and us, and that was it. But they did have a lifeguard, which was
Oh,
really interesting to me. The whole area just felt like they had done things well. All the streets were very well maintained. There are hydrangeas everywhere. So apparently, I'm also a gardener, so I will not go too into this, but the volcanic soil is really acidic, which makes hydrangeas turn blue. So all through the island, there are blue hydrangeas just driving down the side of the road. It's the most gorgeous place. And even by the end, I started forgetting to notice the hydrangeas because they were everywhere. Whereas in America, one little stretch, that would have been the most beautiful place you've ever seen in America. So you're driving around, there's hydrangeas everywhere, there's cows everywhere, and they may get in the middle of the road, and you may just have to wait for them to move.
just roaming free
Just
cows.
roaming, yes. And then you'll see the ocean from most places you go. And if you don't see it, you can drive a little further and you will see it. So most of the towns are around the coast. And then in the middle, because it was a volcano, there is a steep mountain and there are two big lakes, one of which we did not go to. We just read it wasn't that exciting to go there, and there's many other exciting places. The other one we went to at the end of the trip, it's called something like Set Cidades. I will tell you, they speak Portuguese in the Azores, and I found it very difficult to learn any Portuguese. I speak some Spanish, and it did not translate, and I could not quite figure out the pronunciation for a lot of these places, despite trying.
We'll put all the towns that you visited in the show notes. So if someone wants to see the
Perfect.
order of what you did, but how was the language barrier? Like, was that challenging? And did you have to use like Google Translate?
For the most part, no. Most people there spoke English. I had done Duolingo to try to learn some Portuguese beforehand
I love it. You're like, I'm
because
so prepared.
that's who I am, right? I am a nurse. I have that mindset, be prepared. It didn't help at all. I think for one thing, it didn't distinguish on Duolingo between Brazilian Portuguese and Portugal Portuguese. And so some of the pronunciations and words they used were completely different. I also did not get the sense that anyone there cared for me to try to speak Portuguese. Whereas
They're
other
like, let
places
us
I've
just,
been,
yeah, let us
yes,
just
I
talk to
feel
you
like
in
when
broken
I've been
English.
other countries, they've appreciated the gesture I'm trying. Here, I feel like they all looked at me like, ugh, just speak English or don't talk
Yeah.
to me at all, right? So it didn't end up being that big a deal. I think most places were easy to get around in
Okay.
England.
So you guys hop in your rental car, and where do you head first? Which town?
So we went a little east from Ponta Delgada to a small town called Vila Franca de Campo. All the little towns feel very European in that they are tightly put together. All the buildings are very, very old. They have tiny, narrow streets that they fly down in their cars, and there are no sidewalks. So there were some, scary moments with my children who don't don't live in a big city and don't know how to look for cars well. They have the most beautiful street signs. So instead of just having a sign that has a name, they had tiles with beautiful, often Catholic looking images that would say the name of the streets. And CT and I got such a kick out of reading them because many of the streets had like 7 names. Like it would be like Villa Mary de San Juan, blah, 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 blah. So it was just fun to walk around the town and see the differences. There are churches all over the island. They all look very similar. Most of the architecture there is white and black. So it's the black volcanic rock and then this kind of off-white creamy rock that they have mixed together. And so there's church bells all the time when you're around there. And then you can see the ocean. And it's just a
Amazing.
beautiful mix of place. And I would say in general, the culture felt pretty laid back, except for the driving.
It sounds so gorgeous.
It
And you
really was.
rented Airbnbs throughout this trip. So tell us about your first Airbnb and arriving to your first one here in Villa Franca de Campo and
Sounds good.
how you booked them all. Like, did you just pull it up on Airbnb and say, this one looks good, or did you get recommendations?
No, I just pulled it up and looked and tried to read reviews. There is I don't know if you would say a certification or a registration that you do there called Alojamiento Local. So that I think registers with the government. So there's some backup protection I felt in that this was a registered place. And you can see they'll have a little clear sign that will say AL on the Airbnbs, and it will be in the listing on Airbnb. So you can tell. And I used Airbnb more than VRBO. My friend who had been told me that most places seem to go through Airbnb instead of VRBO, but I think they're probably on both as well. But we just thought that was a more fun way to go. There aren't a ton of hotels in the smaller towns. If you stay in Ponta Delgada, the main city, you can certainly stay in a hotel. And we met some people who did that and then would just day trip or do like a bus trip to an area, which may have had some value in that your tour guide would be telling you a lot of interesting information. But for us, that was not the way. We wanted to be in it. So that's why we looked at Airbnbs, and it was really fun. Our first one was this very old house. I suspect had at some point probably been 3 houses they combined into one, but we never could quite figure it out, which especially my son thought was amazing, to come into this old house that looks not American whatsoever. And my kids just ran around it trying to explore it and find the rooms. It ended up having this kitchen that was tacked on the back. And then if you walked outside, there was this, I guess you would say balcony, but not like an American balcony. It was just sort of a porch that was also a roof. But there's the ocean that you could see. And then they had a little area you walked down and there was this little backyard. And it was just lovely and quaint. I will say there was not air conditioning in many of the places we went. Now, it was mostly in the 70s, but it was sort of humid since it was on the coast. So the second place we stayed had air conditioning, and we really appreciated that when we were there. Our first place did not, but we just slept with the windows open. You could hear chickens, calling. You could hear roosters in the morning from up in the hills. And then you could hear the waves sometimes, which was really pretty.
So cool. With staying in all these Airbnbs, did you gather groceries for like breakfast, or did you guys just find your way around to get food when you needed it?
We did get groceries primarily for breakfast and some lunches. I live in a family that really loves to eat out. And so we did do that a lot as well. But we certainly packed lunches a lot or breakfast. Now, they have little grills. Like I was saying, everywhere they just do it right. They have all these lovely overlooks as you drive around the island. They have public restrooms in some of them, and they have public grill areas scattered throughout on the coast as you drive around. So I know our friends we didn't, but got sausages and hamburgers and such, and would stop and make like a little charcoal fire in these grills and grill it.
Cool.
And we really should have done that, but we never were quite organized enough to
That
get it
sounds
together.
complicated to me too. I'm like, do I need to buy the charcoal and a lighter fluid?
Right,
Like, yeah.
right. And
We'll
I
just go
think,
out to eat.
yes, like our son would have love to have made a fire. I mean, like Boy Scout kind of stuff, right? That just sounded stressful to me.
So was there a market just like within walking distance, or you just stopped on your way in and you just grabbed, I'm assuming it wasn't the types of foods we're used to having and the type of
No,
brands. No.
there were in the bigger cities some larger supermarkets, one called Solmar that I remember, and you could get more American type foods. Like we got some spaghetti sauce and spaghetti noodles and meat one day that we made for dinner one night because I tried to keep it simple. A lot of these places also don't have dishwashers, and I'm a spoiled American who doesn't particularly like to wash dishes. So we tried to keep it very simple, but there are smaller markets, but they don't have much you're going to recognize.
Okay. All right. So tell us about Villa Franco de Campo. I'm trying here. The
You're
area.
doing great.
Thank you. What did you get into there? What kinds of excursions did you guys go on?
Yes, so we went walking and exploring around the town. And one thing our kids really love to do is just poke around beaches and coasts. So we went down to this area that had all these black, craggy volcanic rocks, and they said they were tide pooling. I'm not sure if that's an actual term or something they made up, but essentially they were going to find pools of water that had gotten left behind as the waves went out in these volcanic rocks, and they were looking for little creatures and interesting shells. All the rocks are different colors, which I'm sure geologists could tell us more about. I never really learned about that, but it did make it interesting. My daughter was trying to find all rocks one color to make a pile, and my son's just looking for creatures, and they could have spent all day doing that. There was a big island off the coast that I never really quite knew what the name of it was. We could look it up. Some people will go out there to do an excursion. There's an area where you can swim there. We just looked at it from afar, but apparently they have rock jumping competitions or cliff jumping competitions there, or they used to.
Well, I
But that was
read
right.
on Wikipedia that this area is where Red Bull has done some of their cliff
Yes.
diving or jumping, or when I don't know if they're in
Yes.
those funny
And
cars or
now
whatever.
that I've seen it, because we went whale watching, which I'll talk about next, but we rode in the boat around that island. And now that I've seen that, that is absolutely amazing that any human being would jump off that or climb up there. Even just
Yeah.
climbing up there seemed scary. But we had a great time just letting the kids explore. And because we had just gotten there, it was really nice to let them have some independence and just be and do their own thing for a little while and not be on a schedule that first day. The next day, did this whale watching excursion. You have to book that in advance. We went through a really great company called Terra Azul that many other tourists seem to also have known about and were there. It was so interesting. There were people from all different areas. I expected the Azores to be more Americanized with more American tourists, but it wasn't. And I would say it was touristy, but I think it was a lot of European tourists. So we got to hear all different languages while we were on this excursion, which again, for my kids and their first international experience, they were just blown away by this.
Yeah, it's awesome. You're like, we're not in Franklin
Yes.
anymore, kids.
No, not at all. And it was interesting because we went there first, particularly thinking we wanted to start with where whale watching, or it ended up being dolphin watching for us, but where that would be at the beginning of the trip in case we had bad weather so that we could try to reschedule it if we needed to. It was not great weather when we went. It ended up raining. It was chilly. It was cloudy, which I think prevented us from seeing whales because they have people on land who have binoculars that work for them that are watching for whales and evidence of
That's how they
whales.
do it.
Yes, yes. And so then they radio to say, hey, I'm seeing, the water come out of the blowhole at this area. But we did see several variety of dolphins and really close to our boat, which was pretty special. It was a long time. It was in a inflatable small boat, and you're just sitting
I was not
there.
picturing that.
Yeah, you're sitting there you can, out of Ponta Delgada, you can do a bigger boat. But we were in a rinky-dink inflatable boat. And you had a little, I wouldn't even call it a chair to sit on that you could hold on to. And you're just flying through the ocean. And because it was sort of stormy, I mean, we were bouncing around. I felt very in the wild.
Was your 5-year-old girl doing okay? Because I'm just picturing my 6-year-old girl in this
She
experience.
fell asleep.
What?
I was so confused. But at first, she got pretty whiny about it. Seeing the dolphins really helped. But she ended up falling asleep. And again, that was at the beginning of our trip, so she was still jet lagged and tired. But I would say I thought that was going to be a pinnacle experience for us, and it ended up not being. My son was dying to see whales. And the Azores, where they are located, apparently is a whale migration path. So they have all sorts of sea life that comes through there. It's a big spot for birding, if you're into that. I obviously, you can probably tell just from how I'm talking, know nothing about a lot of this, but my son loves National Geographic shows and such. And so he was really excited about seeing whales, and we didn't see him. So that was disappointing. So I would call it dolphin watching or whale watching to your kids.
Okay. Points for trying.
Yes.
All right. What else did you guys get into in this area?
So we drove to an area that was maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Everything is 10 or 15 minutes, it feels like, maybe a little further, but you can drive from one end of the island to the other in 2 to 3 hours, I would say.
Oh, okay.
So everything's pretty close. So we went to this area called Caloura. That's Caloura. It was tiny, but you drive down through this little village, and at the very base, you're at the coast, again with cliffs everywhere, and there's a swimming pool that they have built. So it is a man-made swimming pool very clearly, but you walk out on these rocks and there's just this round, small swimming pool. It's bizarre to us Americans. The water was freezing. You can also swim in the ocean there. And again, they had lifeguards, which I found really interesting. And all these people were just laying around, sunbathing, hanging out.
Is it free?
It was free.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So our kids thought that was sort of fun and different. And my husband and I were just laughing. This is the most European looking place we have ever been. You can immediately tell you are not an American in this place. And in fact, we saw our first topless sunbathers there. My 10-year-old was shocked.
10-year-old boy.
Yes, he was shocked. He's not old enough to be interested. He was more just shocked. He said, "Mom, that girl forgot her bra."
That's amazing.
Like, well, kind of. My 5-year-old sort of noticed and thought it was funny, but it was a very European feel. And they had the most delicious restaurant there called Bar Caloura. I kept reading you need reservations for restaurants. We rarely had a reservation, and we were fine. And we were there in July, which is supposed to be top time. So I'm not sure if we just lucked out. Also living in Franklin, as you know, there's so many people who have moved here and it's gotten busy that I felt like it was much harder to go out to eat here at home than it was in the Azores.
Good to know.
Yes.
What types of food are you getting at like this type of restaurant when you're...
So seafood. And so every day they just post a list of the fish that they have that has come in straight right there from the ocean. And they grill it very simply. They have this red pepper sauce that they use as a condiment that you have pretty much everywhere. And they have the most delicious cheese. So one of the other islands is called Sao Jorge, and they make a specific cheese that's a little harder, I would say, maybe more like a Gouda type level of hardness. But on São Miguel, they just call it fresh cheese, and it's more sort of like mozzarella. It is delicious. And you can have that with bread. We had that everywhere. And then you can put this little red pepper sauce in if you want. And then we would get the grilled fish, and they have a lot of octopus, a lot of seafood. And then they have very simple sides. So potatoes and sort of a side salad that was very unappetizing looking with no dressing. So I will say I was craving vegetables by the time we got home. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, we're big foodies. So we love eating all different types of foods. And by the end of this trip, my husband and I were both like, oh my gosh, we cannot wait to get to an American airport and eat some Mexican or Asian or something that tastes different, because it was all seafood, potatoes, cheese, and hamburgers and steaks, which seems very counterintuitive. However, I mentioned earlier the cows that are just everywhere, and they make really good hamburgers and steaks. So
they make use of the cow population.
They do. And all this to be said, my kids were very happy because there was a lot of food and they are super picky, that they could eat, hamburgers, fries. But they did try other stuff. They tried calamari and they actually liked it. My daughter and I, at one restaurant toward the end, which I can talk about later, but we had the most amazing meal, and we got wreck fish, which I've never eaten, and she loves it. And now it's so funny. We'll go out to a restaurant. She'll be like, did they have wreck fish here? I'm like, no, we're in Franklin, Tennessee. They don't have wreck fish.
We have salmon or tilapia, honey.
Yes. But Bar Caloura, that restaurant by the pool, was a fun, interesting place to go. And then the food was just so good. They were just really good, simple fish. And it was a beautiful sunset. You can't quite see the sunset, but the water will still turn colors, and it was just lovely.
Yes, it all sounds beautiful. So you spent 3 nights in each of these little towns you visited and then ended up staying a little bit longer.
Yes.
So next you head to Nordeste. Is that how you say it?
Yes, which I believe if you live in the Azores, you say something like Nordeste or maybe Nordeste.
Okay.
There's a lot of sh and guttural noises that we never caught on to.
Okay.
But we'll call it Nordeste to be American.
Okay.
How about that?
Nordeste, and you make some stops along the way. So tell us about that.
Yes. So we went to this area called, it looks like Furnace, but it's Furnash. And it is where Yellowstone seems to be. It is geothermal activity. It has that sulfurous smell, but it's so interesting because it's in the middle of this beautiful mountain scene. There's this giant big lake, which is Lake Furnash. And so we drove there. We got there from Vila Franca de Campo. We stopped at a grocery store, loaded up, and then we went to this Lake Furnash. There's one parking lot. You have to pay to be in that parking lot, and you need cash, which is euros, which my kids also found really fun and interesting. But mostly we could do credit card most places, but there were places we needed cash. So that was one of them. And then from there, we walked over, there are these calderas. So boiling pits in the ground. You couldn't even necessarily see some of the stuff boiling. You just saw steam kind of coming out all over the ground. And you certainly smelled that sulfurous smell, which my kids found just delightful to experience. And we happened to get there about lunchtime, which was exactly when you should get there, because in this area, the very, very localized regional specialty is cozida de Furnas, which is a stew. And we did not eat this because my understanding is it's a lot of different boiled organ meats, offal,
which is actually making a comeback and extremely healthy, and people are all about it again. But I probably would pass as well.
Correct. And when I say offal, I mean the OFFAL, which is the various parts we don't usually eat.
I don't know about the OFFAL.
That's the term for the liver, heart, the stuff we don't usually eat.
Yeah. Okay.
To me, that sounds AWFUL. So I'm not interested in it. But so we did not try the stew, but we got to see. So at lunchtime, these men come and they go and use these big, I don't even know what to call them, pieces of iron, and they pull out this giant pot or tube from these bubbling areas in the ground, and they take it to their vans and they drive it to their restaurant.
So it's been cooking in this hot
underground.
That is so cool, though. I mean, I don't want to eat it, but that's super cool.
Yes. I was very content to watch them pull these pots out, and my kids, because and they would put their restaurant name right there where their pot was. So my kids and I, when we first got there, they're looking at this and they're asking me, well, how are they going to get these out? I'm like, I don't know. I'm grateful and sort of annoyed that my kids still think I know the answer to everything. So they have many questions, and I say, I have no idea. And then luckily, here come the men to come get some of the pots, and they're going to answer your question immediately. So that was really fun to watch. And then from that same area, there is a park called Grena, Grena Park. And it is interesting in that we read, had been various things over time. So it had been someone's home and land. Then it was a garbage dump for a while, which is crazy when you see how beautiful this place is. Now they've made it into a park. You do have to pay for it, and I can't remember how much, but it was decently pricey when you consider you could just go hike in many other natural areas in the island for free. But when you're with kids and you're already parked and in a place and they wanted to go and there was a map, it was a no-brainer. And it was great for kids because the paths, because you paid for it, the paths are very manicured. There are a lot of what we called props when we were there hiking, meaning lots of little things that kids could run and jump off of, funny steps that they could walk up, a tree made into a bench, things like that. And if there's some of those scattered along a hiking path, our kids were much more likely to want to keep going.
Yeah, they stay interested. There's something to look forward to as opposed to just like a general hike in the...
And it felt more like an obstacle course, I think, because they had some of these little steps and various things that they could play on and not just hike through the woods. There were a few waterfalls, and at the bottom of it, there were some natural hot tubs because that geothermal water was there. We did not get into those, but it was an interesting, beautiful area. It was worth our time for an hour or two. And then from that same parking lot, you can also get to a zip line treetop adventure. place. We ended up not doing that day. We actually came back to this. This was an activity we learned about later on the trip. And we came back when we had some extra days, thanks to the airline kerfuffle. But that was so fun. It was a Portuguese family who owned the treetop place. And it was relatively new, I want to say within the last year. And they were so great. And it was amazing. Like the mom and dad and their kids were the ones working it. We had a 5-year-old kid helping us with our harnesses and such.
I'm like, I don't know about that.
She was giving us the harnesses. She wasn't, showing us how to attach them, but she was working, but also playing while she was there. And then there was an older boy who was a teenager who helped give us the instructions, and it felt very safe. They had a double safety system, but we went ziplining through the woods and did all this crazy treetop adventure stuff that was
Your
really
5-year-old
fun.
did it?
Indeed, she is fearless. But I will also say, again, difference America and Europe. I asked, well, how far can she go up? And they're like, she can go up as far as she wants to, or you want her to. That was not necessary, I will say, because she did fine on the first level. But when you get higher, it was more zip lines, and you have a different attachment for a zip line. And she was so little, you had to hold her up to get her up there. And then she didn't weigh enough. So she and I ended up getting stuck on a zip line, and the family had to climb out and help us, which was a little crushing for my self-confidence to be dangling there and have a young girl have to come out and save us. But it was a fun adventure, and my kids loved it. But that is all accessible through that one parking lot. You do for the treetop adventure place, you have to maybe do a 10-minute hike around the lake. You can hike fully around the lake on a nice path. And then I understand there's a little village at the south part of the lake that has a church you can look at, and another park that is either free or lower cost. But we have kids. We didn't make it that far. You can't do everything, right?
Right.
Most importantly, the parking lot had an ice cream truck. So when we were done with our adventures, they were rewarded for them.
Yes.
And then there's the village of Furnash, which is maybe a 5-minute drive. It is the most beautiful European village in the middle of these mountains. It was so charming. There's a beautiful botanical garden called Terra Nostra. You have to pay to get in there. You walk around. We did not have enough time. We had not allotted enough time to be there and fully enjoy and soak it up. But speaking of soaking, which I did not say on purpose, but what we spent most of our time doing is they have a natural hot springs. It looks like when you walk in, there's a big house, and it looks like what you would expect a fountain to be right in front of the house. From when you see European chateaus and palaces and stuff, that's where the fountain would be. But here it's a natural hot springs, and it's rust-colored water from the iron deposits. So you pack a bathing suit that you know is going to get ruined because it's going to be stained. And we got in this warm, orangish water that you couldn't see in. I thought it was great. My kids thought it was great. I bet a lot of people would be freaked out by it, but there were many people there and enjoying it. And it was kind of fun.
So was it as hot as a hot tub, or warm, or how hot was it?
So there was that main pool, which I would say was warm bathtub temperature. But then there was also another smaller pool kind of off to the side that was hot. More like
fun.
a hot tub. It wasn't bubbling like a hot tub, but it was also in this almost grotto feeling area. I mean, it felt like a place America would strongly try to replicate in a hotel.
Yeah.
But it was in nature and beautiful and crazy. We kept having these moments where we thought and said to each other, like, we cannot believe we are doing this right now. Or that we would have done all these different things in one day, like be on the ocean playing on a beach and then go sit in a natural hot spring.
Yeah. And then go zip lining.
Wild variety of things. And in that village, lastly, after we went to that place and sat in the orange water, then we walked around the village just a little bit before we left.
Wait, again, pause. Did you like change, or were you just like, and rust swimsuits, we're just going to put clothes on over these?
We changed, and they had really nice changing facilities and a shower there, though we had not thought to bring shampoo or soap or anything, nor did we really want
rinsing
to do
off
that
helps.
There.
Yeah.
So yeah, we rinsed off and just put our other clothes back on. But I would say at all times we had, I mean, I rarely wore real clothes on this trip. It was a lot of, for us, adventure kind of clothes. And there were some times we went to a nicer restaurant or something, but even then I wore pretty casual clothes. But I wore a lot of workout type clothes, and then we would just keep a bathing suit in the car. And we bought a couple cheap towels there, and we would change in our bathing suit and then dry off and put our like workout type clothes back on.
Got it. Okay, so you change and then you're off to explore somewhere.
So the village of Furnash again, this beautiful, quaint European village. And the town square has hissing steam, sulfurous smell. They call them calderas, all in the middle of it. It's like a little park that looks like Yellowstone. It's just bizarre and really neat. And there are water taps there where they have all this natural hot springs water. And you can walk up to this ancient looking tap and just put your cup in and get some water. And there's different areas. There's different temperatures it could be. One of them that we had was actual fizzy, almost like sparkling water. And that was some sort of
What?
natural effect.
And you
Yes. So
drank it?
I drank like one sip.
I would be like a little worried about getting some sort of like not that it's contaminated, but that like my American stomach would not
Sure.
do what my gut wouldn't be ready for it.
Sure. I would say we more saw it as an experience than a place to refill our water bottles.
As opposed to hydrate. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. But that was just really neat. And again, very different than anywhere we'd ever been. And then I'll tell you about one other place that was there. Now, all of this could easily be a day or two. We, again, at the end of our trip, ended up coming back. So at the end of our trip, we did the zip line, and then we went to a different hot springs because my kids really liked that.
And this is all in and around Nordeste and Furnash.
Furnash. So Furnash is in the center. So we stopped there on our way up to Nordeste.
Oh, right. We're still on our way to Nordeste.
I'm just taking a long minute here to talk about this. This was a big day. And then again, we ended up adding at the end.
Right.
I wrote down the name of it. Pocas de Donha Beja. It's a hot springs. And it's basically, I don't know, 8 or 9 little hot tubby pools all put together. So it's a natural stream that's running down, and they've built these pools into it like hot tubs. You have to pay to go into this. We did this the day after we did the treetop adventures. So we were very sore, especially since I'd been dangling on the zip line with my daughter stuck. I was hurting by the end of this. So we went to these hot springs, and we're with all these European people, new experiences, like women with lots of armpit hair and such for my kids to talk about. And we just sat in these orange sulfur smelling hot tubs that were like nice warm water. And it was a really lovely place. Sounds weird, but it was really lovely. And then we went to Nordeste.
Okay. So you make it to Nordeste, and this is your second Airbnb. So what's this one like?
Absolutely amazing. So Nordeste is the remote area of the island. We've talked about how this island in a lot of ways felt comparable to Hawaii. So if you've been to Hawaii, I would say the southern area is a little more like Maui or Oahu, more populated. This area was more like Kauai, so very remote and nature seeming. Lots of just tiny little villages scattered around. And so we stayed in one of the tiny little villages. I'm not even sure we know what the name of the tiny village we were staying in was called. We had this Airbnb. It was the only Airbnb around, as far as I could tell. It was perfect. It was a newer building, though it looked old. It had 2 bedrooms, a nice little living room. And then it had this giant backyard with a pool and a pool house.
What?
It was an infinity pool. It looked straight over the ocean. I cannot remember the details, but I want to say most of the Airbnbs we stayed at were probably about 200, maybe 300 euros a night.
Okay, we're linking this one with the infinity pool.
Yes. I would say I looked at some hotels in the end when we were scrambling to find a place to stay when our flight was canceled. And some of the hotels were like 500 or 600. This was such a deal and more comfortable for a family. But this pool overlooking the ocean, if we had been in America, this would have been the most beautiful place you had ever seen. And again, the views there everywhere is a beautiful view. But this was absolutely amazing. The pool was freezing, but my kids still swim in it. But it's literally just right there overlooking the ocean. And my husband said, and I thought this was really interesting because we've never been anywhere like this, you can tell the earth is round when we look at the ocean here. Because the horizon is curved when you're looking at the ocean. It was just incredible. And there was nothing to see out in the ocean. It was just ocean as far as your eye could see. But the little village or cottage in front of us had goats. And there was just this country man out there walking around with his 2 goats. And there was nothing else going on. So it was this really charming and interesting mix of country, but
ocean and
pool with an ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really,
and you just feel like you're kind of living there because you've got people around that are just living their regular life. And you guys are like, hi.
Yes. There was this older couple that was in a cottage right around us because everything is kind of close together because it's a small village. And she would call for her dogs at night and get mad at her dogs and be yelling in Portuguese. and the husband would come out and yell at them. And my husband and I were just dying laughing because it was so loud and ridiculous sounding. But so, I mean, we really felt like we were in Portugal. And I think we thought we would feel like we had gone to the Azores, this sort of touristy place, but we feel like we have gone to Portugal. In fact, we came back right for the Olympics and we were watching the opening ceremonies with the little boats coming down the Seine. And my daughter kept being like, where is Portugal? Because now it's like the only country she knows about.
Yeah.
But we really felt like we were in Portugal, and that was really neat. And that area is just beautiful. And so we spent one day, we drove down the eastern coast, which that's the Nordeste area, is that kind of northeast area, just cliff sides going straight down to the ocean, lots of beautiful overviews. We stopped at one overview that had a little garden at the top, all these beautiful flowers. There was a public restroom there. There was a little trail you could walk on. There was that beach I was talking about earlier that was a black sand beach with the driftwood teepees that they had built and just a giant cliff. And you had to drive down and then you had to hike down and then hike back up to the parking lot, maybe about 10 minutes each way. So you feel like you worked to get there. But I mean, it was just beautiful. And we had a really unique experience there in that, again, they have this lifeguard who must hike to his job down there and hike back. Just this one Portuguese guy. But my son, who loves nature stuff, noticed that this other child he was crying. He came out of the ocean crying, realized he had been stung by something. So he starts looking and noticed there's these tiny jellyfish. And the lifeguard knew it too. So all of a sudden, Charlie and this Portuguese lifeguard are going around trying to catch jellyfish in a net. And this went on for an hour. So we did all that. We ended up one night in the very most southern sort of tip, which was actually near the first place we stayed, Vila Franca de Campo. But we sort of drove down that coast. And then after the night I'm going to tell you about, we drove straight back through the island. But we had such an interesting experience at this town. So this is the one I really can't say. I want to say it's something like Pavuashan, but I never could figure it out. So we go to this little town. There is a free, nice, well-maintained playground with mini golf right there on the ocean. There's a snack bar where they sell drinks and ice creams, I think burgers and such too. There's a pool, which by the time we got there, I think was closing. I don't know if you had to pay to go to the swimming pool or not, but the swimming pool is on a beach. I mean, it's just unbelievable in this tiny little European feeling town. And so we're there, and my son, not only does he love nature, he makes friends very easily. And all of a sudden he's playing soccer with this Portuguese guy, and they made friends. And then turns out he has a sister, and my daughter and the sister started playing together. And so then the parents came over. And so the man, it turned out, had lived in this little village until he was 17. And then he needed more opportunity in life. So he came to America, married an American woman. And a few years ago, they decided to buy this little, it's like a townhouse basically but it's super old, that they're renovating, and they're going to live there in the summer with their kids. So they're like expats, I guess.
Yeah.
They did say, even though he had lived there until he was 17, because he left, he's not really accepted as a true Azorean by the people there because he left.
Where in America do they live?
In Florida.
Okay.
So our kids hung out with them. It was so great because we were able to just stand. We had a beer with them and learned. I got to ask all the questions I'd been wondering. She told me about this great website. I want to say it's called Surf Azores. We'll have to look it up. But it's Spot Azores. It shows you all the different little beaches. And you can go on at any point and see what the weather is, because this is an island where the weather changes a lot, and you can have rain one place and sun another. So you can get on and see a live stream to see what it looks like. And by the end of the trip, I would just turn it on and like look at different sunsets and such. You know, it was so pretty. But she told me like helpful tips like that. And we got to ask a lot about the culture. We also, through them, met another expat who was there. This woman had married a man who lived there and then has 2 sons. And she and the sons were in a marina paddleboarding when we got there. So we made friends with them. Next thing I know, my son and these 3 boys are jumping off marina. I don't even know what to call it, like the rocks down into the water in the marina, just over and over. The sun is setting. We're drinking beer. My daughter
fun. You're like, we live here now.
Yes. My daughter's making necklaces with the little girl. It was just the wildest experience. We ended up going to dinner with them at their favorite place. It was really fun. And a great way to understand more about the culture.
Yes, that
Um,
is just so special. And I mean, what you guys wanted was to have an international experience and to get out of your comfort zone. Like, you're not going to have that type of experience in Destin.
not
So,
at
this is
all.
just so cool.
No, and if you go to Destin, you're just going to find other people from your area to talk to,
Yes.
right? So this was really neat. And it added a lot of dimensionality to our experience and obviously made the kids very happy.
Yes. And so
Yes.
since all these people are like expats, all their kids speak English. And so it was like easy peasy for you
Yes.
guys all to hang out and
Yes.
be friendly. That's awesome.
It was really
Did
neat.
you like exchange numbers or find them on Facebook or anything?
We did not know.
Oh, just a friend from the past.
I will say I really sort of enjoyed this also because, as I said, we were having beers. One of the ladies had had a lot more beers than we had had, like from before we got there. And we ended up going to dinner, and she was high-fiving with my husband, telling him all these stories. And he is just maybe not the most extroverted person. He was completely overwhelmed. And I was having such a great time watching this all go down.
That's
He was out
amazing.
of his element.
That is amazing.
But then the next day, we did what I would highly recommend for people doing an adventurous trip like this with kids. We had a vacation from our vacation. So we just stayed at our beautiful Airbnb, swam in that infinity pool, read books. I let the kids just have their iPad time. We just were for that
Yes,
day.
that's
And
important
that
too.
was key.
Yeah, I feel like I'm learning that more and more with kids as well. Cause like as adults, we can go, plan a trip. But even my parents were recently in London and my dad loves to plan. And my mom was like, can we just wake up and go to a cafe? And he was like,
Mhm.
no, we got to make it to this train. So I think it is important to remember as you're planning. Now I'm thinking about my New York City ChatGPT
Right.
itinerary to leave some
You
time.
needed to put in rest.
Yes.
Yes.
And add rest.
Yes.
That's awesome.
And another key point was our Airbnb had laundry. So, as you can probably tell from the things I've said we've done, we needed to do laundry by this point.
Yes. You
And
have
that was
rust
really helpful.
colored clothing at this point.
Correct. Correct. So from there, we drove west. So at this point, we're probably where we stayed was about halfway on the coast, maybe a little more east. So we drove sort of the north coast, which I would say that's a surf area. So we went through this area called Riviera Grande, which is where the surfers go to surf. So big waves. We stopped at a tiny little tea factory. I wouldn't say it was necessarily an exciting grand adventure, but it was a good stop with a bathroom. For 20 minutes, our kids got to see and smell some tea. They got to taste it. That was kind of fun. We took some tea home for souvenirs for people,
Hmm.
and it was on the way. And then we ended up at Riviera Grande. We went to the beach there. We saw these giant waves. We got to watch people surf for a little bit, which was neat. There was a restaurant right there on the beach called Tuca Tula, and it was great. We had a great meal overlooking the ocean, really fun place. There was another beach we ended up, again, coming back to at the end of our trip. So we didn't do everything in order because we had those extra days, but probably the most beautiful beach we went to was on that northern coast. It was called Moinos. So it was Moinhos. We learned about this beach from the people we had talked to who lived there because this had not shown up anywhere else. And it was so beautiful. It had flowers all on the cliff going down to the beach and this awesome cafe right there on the beach owned by a Canadian man who talked to us some, and it was great. And we had really good pizza because they do also have pizza a lot of the places. So we had pizza and drank beer. Our children drank Sprite, and they got to play on the beach while we waited for our food because it was right there where we could see them. That was a beautiful place too.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to definitely put that one in the show notes because people are probably like, this isn't coming up in my research.
Right.
You've got
Yes.
the inside scoop.
Yes. Okay. So we end up that day where we ended up, and this was our Airbnb for the next 3 nights that was intended to be our last. So Set Sadad, it's a volcanic lake. So it is an actual volcanic basin. And when I say that, I got there and looked at it and realized this looks different than anywhere else I've ever been. It's not just a lake with mountains around it, but you can see it's a crater and you can tell that looking at it. There are two lakes. They call it the Green Lake and the Blue Lake and they're actually connected, but one of them has algae that makes it appear green and one appears blue, and it's just gorgeous.
Wow.
And there's a tiny little village there. And so because we stayed in Airbnbs, we got to stay in the village. I wouldn't say it was the nicest of the Airbnbs we stayed at, but it was unique in that it was in this little village. And a lot of times the buses or Jeep tours will come from Ponta Delgada for the day to this area. They do a little day trip and they leave. So it was really interesting because by about 4 to 5 p.m., it felt so quiet. And we got
It's
to really
you and the locals.
Yeah, absolutely. There was very little to eat there. There was like one restaurant we walked in, we were like, it
Not
doesn't
happening.
smell quite right, and this is not going to happen. And so we ended up, I think we just had like peanut butter and jellies one night, which was fine. My kids were very happy with that. The first day we were there, it rained. And I think that's very common for this area that's inland. So you just kind of have to wait for the pretty day. But the first day we were there, it rained. We went on a hike in the rain. It was actually really cool and moody and mystical feeling. And also really neat because we ended up going back there another day and it looked completely different. And you could see the ocean from there. And who knew? We certainly did not know when we were hiking what was around us. But that was kind of a fun, different feeling for the kids. And that day when it was raining, we ended up everywhere. I should mention, I had great cell signal, better than in my house in Franklin, which really annoyed me, except for that one tiny place on the center of the island. Therefore, we drove the wrong way to go out. And by the time we realized we were driving the wrong way, we'd probably been driving for 20 minutes, but we could see the sunshine. And I'm like, hey, let's just keep going toward that sunshine. Why not? Because again, everything's pretty close. We ended up going decently close to Ponta Delgada, that main city, which is where the airport is. And there was this little town called Rojas, or little village, I should say, right there. We ended up going into this random restaurant, and it was the best meal I think we had. It was called like Tavernos Soca Rojas. That's where we got this wreck fish my daughter loved. We just had the best meal. We drank the Portuguese wine. They have Portuguese white wine everywhere. It's from the mainland. I don't know why I could drink quite a bit of it and feel fine, whereas at home I have one glass of wine and I feel terrible. But we just had this lovely lunch in the sunshine, and then we drove back to our moody, rainy lake. But then the next day, it was pretty, which was great. So we went kayaking on the lake. We just went down to the little lakefront. There were people who would just set up kayaks. You didn't have to have a reservation. We just paid cash. We got some kayaks. My son insisted he could kayak all by himself. My husband and my daughter and I were in one canoe. You can probably see where this is going. Halfway through, my son's like, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah,
I'm
like, so tired.
Too bad. Like you wanted to do this, and you wanted that because those two lakes connect, there's a bridge and you can kayak underneath the bridge. And he wanted to go see that. Well, that means you have to come back, right? But the lake was actually very shallow. You could see the bottom. So, if there was an emergency, we could have gotten out and pulled him. But he did make it back, which was great. And we had a lovely time talking to the young lady who rented the kayaks to us. She was from somewhere in Europe and just like comes for the summer and stays
like
there.
Her little
and does
side
the
gig.
Kayak rental. Yep.
Cool.
She had a dog. My kids were petting the dog, and it just felt very friendly there.
Yes.
So that was really neat. And then there are two absolutely gorgeous overlooks that are Portuguese names. We can look it up. But if you look at any guidebook about the two famous overlooks over Cidade, you'll find it. One of them has an abandoned hotel that is there, a hotel that they built maybe in the 70s or so. And then they didn't have the money to sustain it. And it is a giant abandoned building. People climb into it and get on the roof of it, even though it says not to. But you'll see tons of people doing that. So if you're an adventurer, you too could climb into an abandoned building. Or you can just watch people do it, which we thought was sort of fun. And then there's another overlook you have to hike to. But then you hike to it, and it was maybe a 15-minute hike. And then there's this little path that has tiny little twigs to tell you where to walk so you don't fall down a cliff. And it goes out to this little rock top that you can stand on and overlook Cidades, the lakes, and then the oceans in the background. And that I realized was where some of the pictures, like on the front of guidebooks or something I'd seen, that's where that's taken.
There's some very pretty pictures when you Google this area.
Yes.
Like that come up initially on Google Images. And it's like, what in the world?
It was amazing and beautiful. So I was glad we did that. Now, my daughter was not doing that at that point. This was our last day of planned activities, and she stopped her foot and said, I will not hike anymore. And when she says something like that, she is serious. So I knew
my youngest daughter. Yeah.
So she ended up actually sitting at the end of one of the paths, and my husband and I and my son took turns walking to this
Up
overlooking
to the
path.
look.
She was not doing anymore.
Yes, she was done.
Yes, but that was a gorgeous area and just such a unique experience. Now, I
Amazing.
have two other things from there to tell you about we did, and then we're almost at the end.
I can't
So,
believe there's so much to do on this one island.
one island. I know.
Like, I
It
feel
was
like people
crazy.
could go and do half of what you did and still be like, I had an amazing trip.
You could, and I bet we could go back and do many other things or just enjoy the things we did longer.
And I
Like
feel
if
like
we
it's
hadn't had
important for people.
kids,
Yeah.
I could sit at a beach all day, right?
Yes. I
You
feel
could
like it's
just
important for people
absorb.
to know too that if this, like, not everybody might feel comfortable booking an Airbnb in this tiny town, which I think it's so cool that you guys did that and we're like one with the people. But it sounds like you're saying people could 100% book an Airbnb or a hotel in Punta Delgado and take excursions from there and have their home
Definitely.
base.
And that is
Yeah.
the way a lot of people do it.
Yeah.
And they will book, like I mentioned in Set Saudade, we would see these ATVs and Jeeps come through, which of course my son was drooling and like, why did we not do that?
Yeah.
But a lot of those people would come from Ponta Delgada up for the day.
Okay.
I would just say you would want to really watch the weather because you want to make sure if you're doing a tour that, again, you get a good day where you can see things.
Yeah.
But you
Okay. What are your
certainly could do
last two
that.
things?
Or there's Santa Barbara Eco Beach Resort, one of my friends stayed at. It's on like the northwest coast. It's a nice hotel. So there are some, we just didn't experience that.
Yeah.
All right.
You wanted to be with the goats.
Correct. Yes. Western side, and we wanted more space.
Yes.
And washers and dryers. Okay. West coast of the island, there's this beautiful town called Moisteros. The important part of this is it's the very westernmost side. So we saw the most gorgeous sunset there. We're on this beach, all these people watching the sunset. And when the sunset, everyone clapped.
Oh,
Like
I
they were
love it.
clapping for nature. And that was obviously beautiful. And then I've saved probably my favorite experience for last. This is on the north, no, I'd say more the southwest coast at this point, sort of near Ponta Delgada. So it'd be very easy to get to from there. It's called Ponta de Ferraria. It is, I'm not sure how to explain this. It is a natural hot spring that's also part of the ocean. So you drive down this cliff, there's a big parking lot. There is also there, I think, an area that maybe is sort of like an American spa, though European.
Yeah.
We did not pay to
Islandy
go
Portuguese spa.
Correct. Like we're with kids. We didn't do that. We went on to the natural area. So you climb down these black rocks. They have in the ocean, it almost looks like a tide pool. And we had read to go at low tide, which will make sense as I talk about this. So we had to climb over these rocks. And then there's this one area with some ladders, and you just climb down into the ocean. As the ocean comes into this rocky area, it fills it up. And so it's almost like a natural wave pool. You are amongst volcanic rocks that cut your legs up and algae, which makes you slip, but it's worth it. And
how big is this area that you're climbing down into?
Oh, not big. I mean, I would say
like as big as a regular backyard swimming pool. That's what I'm picturing. But volcanic-y and
maybe, but volcanic-y and irregular in shape.
Yeah, yeah.
There are ropes strung across it that you can just hold on to as the waves come in and out. We did know about this, and we took a life jacket for our daughter, which was vital. My son, who's 10, who's a pretty good swimmer, was okay, but we needed a parent right next to him. The reason to do this at low tide is because when you're at the back of the pool, the natural hot springs are going into the water, and so it's hot back there. And then if you swim up to the front where the waves are coming in, it's cold from the ocean water coming in. So then you're hanging onto a rope in this natural wave pool, getting all the adrenaline, but also having this interesting experience of temperatures. And you've just climbed down a ladder with all these European people to be in this pool. And then people will get out and put their towels down on these volcanic rocks that are warm because they're black and just sunbathe. And there was a lifeguard there, which was super odd. And at 6 p.m. when we were there, because we were there at low tide and that's when it was, his shift was over and he got up and blew his whistle 3 times and waved to everybody, and everybody clapped for him like he'd done a good job. And he left and no one changed one thing about their behavior and just continued on.
I love it.
It was a bizarre and wonderful experience.
I appreciate the safety coming from the Azores.
Right. I don't know if any of these lifeguards ever would actually do anything. They did not
Right.
seem particularly strict about anything they were doing, but I appreciated they were there.
Hey, if I lived there, that sounds like a great job. Sit at the edge of the ocean and
Absolutely.
wave to a
People
bunch of
watch.
European and American tourists.
Yes, but
That
that was
sounds
one of
cool.
those experiences where you literally could do that nowhere else in the world,
Yeah,
which made it really special.
amazing. I really can't believe how much you guys did in this one island in the middle of the
Yes.
Atlantic
But
Ocean.
to be clear, to your point, if you are not an adventurous spirit, and I will say, I like to go out and do things, but also that is mostly driven by my husband and son who are unable to sit. So I think you could easily go there, go to a beautiful place and park your butt and just enjoy how beautiful it is and eat some good food. And you would also have a great time.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so you're supposed to be wrapping up your trip by now. You're supposed to be leaving, and then you guys get the news that everything's gone haywire and planes aren't going anywhere.
Yes, so it's Friday night. We get an email our flight for Saturday was canceled. So I'm so grateful they were able to notify us ahead of time so we could scramble and figure it out. But we weren't in an airport trying to figure this out with children. So they just emailed and they're like, you are rescheduled for Monday. So quite a bit later than we were imagining. We, of course, stayed on hold for the airplane forever for the air company, the airline. I don't know why I can't say
The
that, the
airline.
airline. And we finally realized we are getting out Monday. There's no way we're getting out sooner. Okay, we got 2 more days of vacation, but this is, my daughter had just stomped her foot and said, we are no longer hiking. So I knew, like, we are no longer hiking. So we were scrambling, trying to figure out what we were going to do. At this point, we didn't know if we could extend the rental car or not because we couldn't get in touch with them at this time of night. So we decided, we found an Airbnb. There were like 3 or 4 that were open. We found one that was more expensive than we intended to pay. However, it was nice and we were done.
Yeah.
So we wanted a nice place to go. And it was also much less expensive than it would have been in America. And I would say most things you get there and they're just like food, especially, was much less expensive than in America. So we ended up, and this house was a little bit east of Ponta Delgada. So we were like, if we end up at this house, we could just stay at this house and get a taxi to the airport and we'll be okay if we can't extend our rental car. But we did, and that worked out fine. So that last day we did our last big adventure. That's when we went to the zip lining place and went to the natural springs with the orange water where we just sat in there. So we did that big adventure day. And that was the day, like we woke up at a volcanic lake in Set Ciudad. We did zip lining through the trees. We sat in an orange natural hot
spring.
spring. And now we ended up in the south coast, a little east of Ponta Delgada, in a more populated area. I would say this was maybe suburban, not like you and me in Franklin suburban, though. It was
Yeah.
suburban for the Azores. And so it was a little busier. It was not remote, but we stayed in this 4-bedroom modern house with a pool and hot tub. And that was exactly what we needed at that moment. If we'd had to go stay somewhere that we thought was a little gross, that would have been really hard for the morale of our family at that point.
Yes.
And so it was just amazing. We had done all of that in one day, right? On the same island, and that we were able to drive and experience all of that in one day. But we ended up just staying that last day in this house. Our kids swam.
Yeah.
We did go to a restaurant because I had no intention to cook. I would have loved to have just eaten sandwiches, but I didn't even want to go to the store. So we did end up going out to eat. But we mostly just sat there and again had another vacation day from our vacation. And it was so much fun and great.
I'm glad you guys got that. Like when you were done, at least you got
Yeah.
a place to chill and reflect on everything.
Yes.
Did the airline give you any money back for all the issues that kind of helped go towards this Airbnb or
They
your
did
troubles?
not. And I'm sure we could have attempted to sit on the phone
Phone.
and a long hold, but we figured that we were probably not going to get anything back given this was the global software issue and not at the fault of the airline necessarily.
Yeah.
So
Just
we
curious.
talked at the moment, we were like, we should call later and see. And then we were both like, neither of us really wants to deal with that. We're just
Yeah.
going to take this as a gift.
Yes. And just sit here and
A
enjoy
gift and a
one more
very
day.
expensive from ourselves gift.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, this has been so amazing. Okay, wait, you did one more thing when you were stuck. Hungry Whales walking tour?
No, we did that at the beginning, and that's so important. And I forgot to say we
Oh,
did
well,
that.
let's say
That
it
was
real quick because
great.
that's in Ponta Delgada, the main
Ponta
area.
Delgada in the big city. Yes, we
Yeah.
went on a food walking tour with this company, Hungry Whales. It was a great thing to do toward the beginning of the trip. We got to walk around the big city. We got to see, they have every street has cobblestones. It's that black and white cobblestone. And there's different patterns on each street you walk on. So one will have stars, one will have stripes. It was
Wow.
so beautiful and interesting. I think mythology of this, that who knows if it's true, was they did that so the drunken sailors going back to port could find their way
Find their way
back and
home.
know
Oh
where
my
they
gosh, I
were.
love that. That's so
Yeah. So when you were
funny.
talking at the very beginning about how this is just a stop in the middle of the Atlantic, that's how this island came to be as a settled place, because it was the stop. So when ships were going from Europe across the ocean, this was the place to stop. So that's why it developed into such a big port.
How
And so
cool.
we learned that kind of history from this walking tour. So it was a really great way for all of us to know more about the history of the islands at the beginning. We got to try lots of different foods. They had a farmer's market that we stopped at and got to have all this beautiful pineapple and passion fruit and cantaloupe that they grow there on the island. And so
Amazing.
that was really fun. And we got to go to a couple different restaurants. There was one where they brought out smoking, literally flaming chorizo. They lit the flame under the chorizo at the table. And I thought my son's eyes were going to pop out of his head. He was so excited about it. And it was just a really neat experience. And it was a great way. We talked to other tourists, got some of their recommendations, and we also got to ask the tour guide a lot of different questions. So that made it a very well-rounded trip too, because we did a lot of adventure, and this was something a little more historical and educational.
Sounds incredible. Okay, Jenny, I end every episode with, if someone listening is considering this trip, what is it about the Azores and Sao Miguel Island that would make you say, just book it?
I would say if you're into the idea of a European Hawaii with elements of Yellowstone, this is your place.
Incredible. I mean, how did we not even know this existed?
I know it's wild, and I feel like I've been telling everybody about it, which is how you knew about it, because I came home
Yes.
and told our mutual friend and anybody else who would listen, you've got to go to this place. It's amazing, and it's pretty easy to get to. And it was just the most fun.
Well, thank you for being a wealth of knowledge about the Azores. And we will put so much that she talked about in the show notes. So if you guys are trying to figure out her itinerary or the different cities or her favorite spots, it's all going to be there. And thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, it was fun to relive.
That wraps up another episode of Trip Tales. If you have a trip you'd like to share about on the podcast, email me at triptalespodcast@gmail.com and I'll add you to the schedule. Also, be sure to follow the show so that you don't miss any upcoming vacation destinations. And if you have an extra minute in your day, please leave a review for the podcast. It helps more than you could imagine. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next episode of Trip Tales.